Welcome back to my short series on how to vote. Do take a look at the first three episodes on YouTube under Barney Wiggett for some context on how I'm approaching this topic. You know, there has been for many years one issue that determines how a lot of Christians vote, and it's about abortion. That's what I'm going to talk about today. Someone said, I can't count the number of Christians I know who are one plank voters. He said they'd put Vladimir Putin in the White House if he promised to overturn Roe v. Wade. I'm going to address that one issue as it relates to voting for one candidate over another. This isn't going to be any sort of comprehensive treatment of the topic of abortion, and I'm not going to try to convince anybody, any pro-choice person to change their views or even address Democrat or Republican platforms. You can access a lot of good materials on those topics. But as you'll see from my previous episodes, I'm not partisan. I have a preference, a strong preference for a candidate in this particular presidential election, and I've shared it, but you have to make up your own mind. All I want to do here is to speak to whether or not the abortion issue warrants being the single issue to determine one's vote for a candidate. And is the candidate's stance or alleged stance on that one issue a determining factor on how a pro-life person votes? I'm absolutely not saying that a pro-life ethic isn't or shouldn't be a top-tier criteria as we decide who to vote for. You know, it's true that a lot of Christians are one-issue voters. Unfortunately, most of them are what I would call one method voters or one strategy voters regarding abortion. And I'm simply asking the question, is the method of making abortion illegal the deal breaker? To many people, nothing else matters, and that's what I want to speak to. And I realize I am likely to disappoint most of you watching this. A third of you are going to be mad at me for being pro-life. Another third are going to be mad at me for not being pro-life enough. And maybe a third will pause a minute and think about how to expand the parameters of your opinions on the matter. So let me begin by saying I am proudly pro-life. I do believe that every baby formed in the womb deserves a chance to live. I mean, except to save the life of the mother and in some cases of incest or rape. Terminating a pregnancy is wrong, principally because God's image is stamped on that child's spirit somewhere. And to honor that image is to honor God. And though not everybody believes this, of course, I presume a large percentage of my audience, of this audience, does believe that. And so I'm not going to spend any time making the case against abortion. And I'm not going to give stats or describe the horrific details of an aborted baby or discuss the history of Roe v. Wade or the different stages of a baby's development. I'm certainly not going to condemn anyone to hell who has performed or had abortions. It isn't in my heart at all to blame anyone for former choices. I mean, I've attended pro-life rallies. I even got tear gassed at one. I've often voted for anti-abortion candidates. I've raised money for crisis pregnancy centers. I've urged pregnant women bent on aborting their child to consider adoption. And I've preached on the sanctity of human life in churches. And while I regret absolutely none of these attempts to abolish the practice of abortion, I'm not convinced that it is the sole issue that should be on our minds when we go to fill out our ballots. And I do want to talk about having a more fully orbed pro-life ethic where it fits into the process of electing candidates to office and the run for president in 2020 election in particular. So I call that approach being consistently pro-life. That is pro inside and outside the womb. I mean, I think too many evangelicals believe that life begins at conception and ends at birth. I like what Shane Claiborne wrote when he said, wouldn't it be beautiful to have a pro-life movement that stands against abortion but also stands just as passionately against gun violence, militarism and war, the degradation of creation, which I would add as a danger to humans and the divine image, and police brutality and all other things that destroy human life. I mean, Christians keep giving their support to politicians who fail to support policies that actually reduce abortions, even as they claim to be pro-life. I mean, I think we need a consistent pro-life ethic, is what I'm trying to say. A consistent life ethic from womb to tomb. You know, one that protects life before, during, and after birth. And so to be consistently pro-life, we have to think way past obstetrics to pediatrics and all the way through geriatrics. Ever since I started following Jesus, it's been a no-brainer for me that babies inside and outside the womb are God's beloveds and should be treated as such. But the parameters of my pro-life stance have always extended far beyond being simply pro-birth. In these conversations, we often use the phrase sanctity of human life. And you know, there's even a Sanctity of Human Life Sunday each year to remind us of this reality. But that sanctity doesn't end after delivery. Pope Francis said, our defense of the innocent unborn needs to be clear, firm, and passionate. For at stake is the dignity of a human life, which is always sacred and demands love for each person. And he says, regardless of his or her stage of development. I have two granddaughters, just about 5 years old now. Photos and videos by the thousands of these two little pieces of perfection may be had at request. But I prayed and prayed for them to be born with all their parts and their faculties, and thank God they were. But my prayers for these two little girls' well-being haven't waned since their exit from the birth canal. If anything, I'm praying more and more each day for them. I'm so glad they came here healthy. But now I want them to stay healthy and holy and helpful and happy. Now, if you know me, you're not surprised by that string of H's in the prayer that I began praying for my own children when they were born. Healthy, holy, helpful, and happy. Somebody put it this way, and this may be too strong for some of you, but I think you'll get the point whether you agree with it or not entirely. She said, if you fight for babies before they're born and don't work hard to support them for the rest of their lives, you're not pro-life. If you're not appalled by the gun violence in our country and taking action to address it, you're not pro-life. If you vote pro-life but are not driven to action when you see refugee babies wash up dead on the shores of the Mediterranean, you're not pro-life. If you consider yourself pro-life and are not currently fighting hard to demand that police be held accountable for their actions when they murder black people, you're not pro-life. That's pretty strong, I know. See, in my view, when we think about pro-life in these terms, which I believe offers a more comprehensive view of God's heart for human life, it's a little harder to automatically assume that Christians are obligated to vote exclusively with Republicans all the time. Those who care only about fighting abortion and won't fight for the rights of those who have been born are not purely pro-life. They're merely pro-birth. Followers of Jesus should be for all that tends toward life and against everything that colludes with death. Which is why I'm opposed to to death-friendly practices of abortion, but also torture, war, environmental exploitation, certain kinds of firearms in the hands of civilians, neglecting the poor, walling out the immigrant and the asylum seeker, and health care unaffordable to millions. I'm against those things. And I vote for candidates that have some or all of my same convictions. The abortion industry is part of a bigger picture of what destroys the people that God loves. And if we want to effectively end abortion, we need to stop focusing on where and how and start focusing on why. What drives a woman? Why does she abort her child in the first place? And what can we do to alleviate that circumstance? You know, most of the women having abortions aren't privileged. They're not liberal feminazis. Most of the women having abortions are women in poverty who feel like they don't have another option. I live for the day when abortion is eradicated from our world, but the Supreme Court is not an effective means for achieving that goal, in my opinion. I think we have to change our strategy. Talk about the why, and then what are we going to do about that? And we have to quit thinking as the Republican Party is the party of life. And we've got to start providing comprehensive solutions that address, real needs instead of chasing our tails in a circle. I mean, what is it that they say? Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So, and here are a lot of ways. Let me just list a lot of ways to fight against abortion, like serving at domestic abuse shelters, or sharing wealth with expectant but under-resourced families, or working with adoption ministries, or organizing for better education, or working on initiatives for childcare, or creating parents' night out programs at local churches, or mentoring young mothers, or teaching youth about chastity and dating, or taking young pregnant women into our homes to carry their babies full term, and adopting babies as well. So I'm saying that when we think that the struggle against abortion can only be pursued through voting for candidates that promise conservative judges, those other priorities don't even occur to us, and those ventures might well be more effective in the long run than waiting for Roe v. Wade to be repealed. So there's no guarantee that laws against abortion effectively reduce the number of abortions. Someone who is hell-bent on getting an abortion is not always going to be dissuaded by the fact that it's against the law. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't pass those laws. I'm saying that it may not be as effective as we've been led to believe by certain pundits and preachers. A poor woman is 5 times more likely to get an abortion than an affluent one. And more recently, it was found that abortion rates increased during the Great Recession. Clearly, abortion and economic inequality, they're related. Criminalizing abortion has not proven to be a particularly effective strategy to prevent it. Fixing the inequality, though, might and does actually. Strengthening the social safety net is a more meaningful way to combat abortion than instituting a ban on it. And if you truly want to defend the right to life, support women and lift the poor. So I hope and pray that someday Roe v. Wade will be overturned, but I don't vote for candidates on that principle alone. That said, let me talk about voting for consistently pro-life candidates. Consistently pro-life. Excuse me. Even if Roe v. Wade were to be overturned by the Supreme Court, the issue is going to be sent back to the states. Abortion is very likely to remain legal in some, so-called blue states, and illegal in a lot of the so-called red states. So a legislative victory isn't going to necessarily end abortion in America. It's just going to make it more difficult for guess who? The poor woman. Poor women in some states, because they'll have to travel if it's illegal federally. They'll have to travel to get an abortion, and as a result, some of those women are going to resort to unsafe methods of terminating their pregnancies at the risk of their own health because they can't afford to just, travel across the country. Or they'll keep the baby, and without better resources for poor mothers, we just perpetuate the cycle of poverty and increase the possibility of abortions. We've addressed the cycle, and more women kept their babies, and poverty, you know, isn't going to likely diminish by just making it illegal. Excuse me. So, of course, poverty is not the only reason women abort their children. Sometimes it's just a matter of preference or convenience. I know that. And the only real solution in that case is to change the culture through introducing people to Jesus and discipling them in the truth about the sanctity of human life, in addition to increasing the economic benefit to poor women. Ironically, some pro-choice lawmakers do more to reduce the number of abortions by their greater concern for vulnerable women and children after birth than those who only seem to care about abating abortions without any workable, compassionate plan for the non-aborted child and impoverished mother. If she had better economic opportunities like living wages or housing that doesn't take her whole paycheck each month, or affordable health insurance, health care, or maybe some affordable child care so she can work, she might be less inclined to abort her child to begin with. I would call those pro-life initiatives. And if we provide better support to women who want to deliver but feel they don't have the option, would be, I think it would be moving the needle in a much effective way, much more effective way than if we simply continue to rant against abortion and hope the next president and the Supreme Court is going to overturn Roe. I mean, a case in point would be what happened during the Obama years. He's pro-choice, but his policies that benefited the poor mothers and children seem to have played a role in reducing the number of abortions during his 2 terms in office. So let me cut to the chase. What about Donald Trump versus Joe Biden? Okay, I'm just going to be straight up with you about this. Which of the two have a more consistent pro-life ethic? Well, it's no secret that Mr. Trump wasn't pro-life until he threw his hat in the ring and ran for president. And in order to court the Christian vote, he announced his newly discovered objection to abortion. He even went so far as to propose punishing not only the abortionists, but the women too, which I consider ridiculous. But giving him the benefit of the doubt, he may be pro-birth, maybe he is. But from where I sit, he's definitely not pro-life in any sort of consistent way. His policies on social justice, immigration, earth care, gun control, women, race, you name it, they all make my point. He's not pro-life consistently anyway. And I don't think holding your nose to elect Donald Trump for the conservative judges he's going to appoint and has appointed is good judgment. I mean, there's no guarantee that that strategy is going to overturn Roe. And even if it did, there's no assurance that fewer women would opt for abortion, not to mention the risk of many having life-threatening ones. So it's my view that Mr. Trump is totally unqualified and incompetent to govern in every other way. I don't just think that the slim to none possibility of overturning Roe is worth the risk of all the horrific things that Mr. Trump brings to the table. How about Joe Biden? Well, he believes it's a woman's choice to abort, a position I seriously disagree with. His views, but on the other hand, his views on care for the vulnerable are, in my opinion, more apt to reduce abortions than increase their number. He advocates for all stages of life by proposing cheaper health care, housing, college education, policies for better environmental care and gun control, job training, providing diapers for low-income families, which is no little thing, while opposing dehumanizing and family separating policies like like they have it in immigration detention centers and mass incarceration. So I don't find compelling the argument to vote for a candidate like Donald Trump, who is, in my opinion, reprehensible in every way on every issue but pro-birth. It's about far more than Supreme Court appointees, which is one narrow issue to trade off for a political leader who threatens the truth with lies upon lies upon lies and democracy with autocracy. I mean, I'd rather have Biden in office and push for a consistent pro-life value than endure another 4 years of Mr. Trump, whose pro-life ethic is paper thin at best. And you might not agree with my assessment of Mr. Trump or even my logic regarding saving more babies in the long run, which is your prerogative, but this is how I see it. A woman named Stephanie Kreider, who belongs to a Vineyard Church in Columbus, Ohio, was the executive director for Ohio Right to Life. She decided that she couldn't support Mr. Trump and couldn't work for and keep working for the pro-life group as it prepared to help him win re-election. Excuse me a minute. She said to support Trump and work for his re-election, she'd have to act as if some lives didn't matter. She said, quote, "I believe God suffers with us all. God suffers with the unborn child being pulled from the womb. God suffers with the immigrant child pulled away from his family at the border. God suffers with George Floyd when he breathes his last. All of these people matter to God," she says. "My greatest fear," she says, "is that in the pro-life movement and the evangelical church, we become so tied to the Republican Party and President Trump, they don't all matter to us." Okay, let me conclude with this, and I call this the ultimate solution, of course. As a believer in Jesus, I'll say what goes without saying, that ultimately what we need more than anything else is for God to change hearts. Let's call that the spiritual solution. So when I say changed hearts, I don't mean just the hearts of pregnant women choosing to carry their babies full term. Of course, that's absolutely needed. But there are some other people who need a change of heart as well in our culture. First, there's the men who impregnate the women in the first place. I mean, they need a change of heart to man up with emotional and financial support. And then there's the Christian community that I think could stand some heart work in doing some of the things that I've suggested above to offer our own assistance to women in crisis pregnancies, as well as lobby for government programs to support women and children. That's the ultimate solution. We need a change of heart. We need God. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope that you will seek the Lord on how to proceed in the upcoming election. And God be with you as you do.